Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Hello everyone, my name is Mike Duchan, MD for short. Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. The past 2 years, the country has gone through very tumultuous time. Notwithstanding the outcome of the 2016 presidential election, we've learned a couple of very important lessons. One, the system of democracy we have here works. And second, the system of democracy we have here has many flaws. Most of this was made aware by the fact that not that we have an executive branch running amok, but rather a legislative branch fully controlled by one political party which decided to do absolutely nothing in regards to an executive branch determined to destroy the very basis of our democracy. It was a very painful 2 years. During the 2018 midterm election, we were again reassured that our system of democracy works. More than 2 centuries and a half ago, the framers of the Constitution set it such that things like that should be taken care of at the ballot box. Not that those years, those painful times are gone, but at the very least, we begin to see a glimmer of hope. Welcome to 2019. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social, political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. Today we have very special discussions of racism and institutionalized racism in America, race relation, as well as a brief understanding as to why our system of democracy is in jeopardy. Both of those topics we have been discussing, and both of them impact the nation, and both of them should be of extreme importance to every American. If you have not been watching, or if you've not been following this program, the Fourth Branch program is catered exclusively to individuals with common sense. And our objective is to remove ignorance, which represents the greatest obstacle to any democracy. John F. Kennedy said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. It is also said that ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. In other words, it is extremely important that we deal with that very aspect of our lives if we ought to make progress in anything, including the very precious democracy we have. We will begin by continuing the conversation about race relation in America. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. One, to bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. Two, to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. Three, to extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. If you have been watching this program or you've seen this video before, you might be very familiar with the fact that when we talk about race relation, we are taking a journey since the beginning of time, so to speak, in order to explain why racism, discrimination still rampant in the United States of America. You see, we are not born racist. No one is. If you put all the babies in the world in a room, they have no idea of the notion of racism. Now, if there was anyone to teach them or to pass them information, racist information about the other one that doesn't look like them, we would have a perfect world. But unfortunately, this is not the world we live in. As such, it is extremely important to understand the origin of this plague in the country. It's a plague, obviously, because it is not something that anyone looks forward to. It is detrimental to one group or another. It prevents progress and it creates tension. As such, it becomes everybody's concern to look for a solution for this problem. Here in the United States of America, a solution is almost impossible. And the reason is not that complex either. It is because both parties would not talk about the very roots, the very aspect, the very factors which make this predicament so unbearable. We decided at the fourth branch to do just that. The only time that we've seen this, at least temporarily, a semblance of talking about a solution comes forth is whenever a Black individual falls victim of either police brutality or execution on the street. Then a group of individuals show up on TV parading and showing their expertise as to what needs to happen, what needs to be done in order to solve the problem. A few days later, all conversation about race relations disappear until the next tragedy, which is sure to be another Black. So we understand the problem and we bring it forth in this program, regularly talking about this very aspect of this problem in America, race relation. But we go and talk about this under the banner War on Blacks. It is not a misnomer. It is not for sensation. And it is not by mistake that this banner was picked. War suggests casualties. And casualties there have been in the Blacks community. Physical casualties, emotional casualties, psychological casualties, and financial casualties. And as we move and talk about the very aspect of those casualties, we will delve into why racism, discrimination plays such an important role in inflicting those casualties on Blacks, but most importantly, where does it originate? It is important for both parties, the victim, those who are victims, and those who cause the victimization of that group. In other words, Blacks and white. Yes, the discussions of race relation in America is not really as simple as Black and white. And the reason for that is because, obviously, we are not talking about a solution to a simple problem. We're talking about a solution which involves human being. Emotions is involved, understanding is involved, and even knowledge is involved. And we are referring to people with various degree of knowledge, various degree of intelligence, and of course, various degree of emotion. Blacks are overly emotional about this topic. Whites are overly sensitive about the topic of race relation. As such, both parties stay away from it. How do you solve a problem you do not tackle? How do you solve a problem you cannot sit down and hash out the roots of the problem? Cannot be. Even expert in any field, whether it's science, medicine, the problem must be first acknowledged, second understood, in order to craft a solution. You may recall a couple of years ago, there was an outbreak of Ebola. And the scientific community was racing against time to find a remedy, a cure. Now, the problem was not concocting a cure. The problem was understanding the disease. And once the disease was understood, it became very easy to provide a remedy for the problem. Race relation, be it here in America or anywhere else, requires an understanding as to what causes it. Yes, in America, it's blacks and white. It's a problem between blacks and white. Of course, any race in between. In other countries, it could be group, tribes, etc. But we are not concerned at this point about other places. Here in America, it's a question of blacks and white. So, where does the problem come from? Why are we still talking about racism and discrimination in the United States of America in the midst of the 21st century? The answer is not as complex. The solution is. I'll be right back. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Why does racism, discrimination continue to be one of the major conflicts between blacks and white? Why is that? Why are we still talking about it? If you are black, no matter what your social status is, you cannot but experience what blacks of any social status have gone through. Yes, your predicament may be a little bit better because of your social status, but regardless of where you're at in the scale in society, even if you're one of the most successful individual, you will encounter situation that clearly say it's because you are black. Now, that did not come by accident. Just for sake of argument, remember the most powerful individual in the nation a couple of years ago, Barack Obama, black. I don't have to go through the whole detail, but if you've been in this country, you pretty much have plenty of information. We're not here to talk about a specific individual, but a specific problem: racism in America, race relations. Now, although we discussed about the casualties in detail before in the introduction, but as we continue the conversation about race relation, we will continue to bring forth other examples and to make the point about why blacks continue to suffer the casualties of the war inflicted on them. It did not happen by accident. It happened because of specific predicament. One, slavery. In 1619, the first shipment of blacks captured, kidnapped from Africa, landed on American soil in a city called Jamestown, Virginia. At that time, it was a British colony. And lives for blacks will never be the same. Yes, indeed, blacks were captured, kidnapped even, separated from their families, chained, put on a boat for travel that will last weeks, 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time. Quite a few of them did not make the trip. They died. They dropped their body at sea. Now, picture this image for a second. You in your home, living your life peacefully, minding your own business. You don't have a problem with anyone. And suddenly, a group of people show up at your home, armed with weapons, and hold you hostage, you and your family. But what they had in mind was even more horrific. They didn't just come to kidnap you, to hold you hostage and make a demand for you to be released. What their intention were to capture you and to force you to work for them for free, separate you with your family, wives, children, and sold them to different buyers in different parts of the world. Suddenly, your families, you no longer have a family. You are forced labor. Your women are sold to other parts of the world, your children are sold to the highest bidder. And this is how it started for blacks. Something inflicted on them by whites for no other reason that they see money making opportunities. Blacks did not go and bother whites. They did not go out of their way to look for a war, but they were living their lives, and whites show up with weapons, chase them. Those they could not capture, they kill them. And those they capture, they ruffle them, beat them, slap them around, and put them on a boat for a journey that will last weeks, not fed properly, not cared for, and a number of them died during the journey. That was the predicament for blacks. Those who made the journey were sold to various parts of the world: Europe, the Caribbean, America, Latin America. They were sold in different parts. They were just product like any other product. They were simply sold. This is a flyer that usually would be put out in communities to let them know that a shipment of blacks is on the way. And those who have money to buy, they know exactly where to go to buy blacks. We will go through those details, through those different aspects in greater detail, but let's fast forward to slavery, where they were subjected to horrific harm. Blacks were beat until they bled. And by being beat, we don't mean just any kind of beating. This gentleman's name is Gordon. He is a former slave. He happened to be at the end of when the Emancipation Act was passed. That particular picture was taken of him in, I believe, 1962, 1963. This is not a rendering. This is not painting. This is the picture of a former slave. And the way that slaves were beat, they take both of their hands, pin against the floor, usually very hot, and both feet pin against the floor without shirt on, and they were beat until they bled. And that guy, Gordon, was beat several times. Before the first beating, before the bleeding even get healed, he was beat again and again and again. And that is to teach lesson to the slaves and to instill fears on other slaves. Despite what you just saw, Gordon was lucky. And by lucky, I mean he survived. Not every slave who got beat were that lucky, because after they bled, they get infection. Some of them died. That was the plight of blacks in slavery. Now, I want you to understand a very important aspect of this. Because when we talk about slavery in America, it sounds like one of those words, oh my God, I can't believe that they were doing that to human beings. It sounds like soft word, like philosophical discussion about slavery. For blacks, it wasn't philosophical. It was war. They waged war on blacks from Africa all the way to here in America, where they were inflicting physical pain on them, emotional pain on most of the women. They raped them at will. And their kids, if there is a kid that come out of it, they sold the kid to the highest bidder. Now, as if that weren't enough, when Abraham Lincoln proclaimed to free slaves by the executive order Emancipation Act, whites, slave owners, were not happy. Now, understand one thing about this very predicament. Those are people, the white slave owners, who had the time of their lives. They make money on the back of the blacks. They become rich. They own houses, lands, businesses, while inflicting these inhuman pains on blacks, these emotional pains on blacks. As far as financial casualty, blacks were already at a disadvantage. So they're inflicting those pains on blacks. All the time that they were doing that, they were going to church praising God. They had the love of God in their heart while inflicting those excruciating pain, these inhuman pain, these horrific pain on blacks. That's why me personally, who study history, who understand history, I always find, especially whites who are racist, very hypocritical, because they always give that face that they present to you when they're doing something completely different. Yes, they were at church with their family praying God while torturing other human beings, forcing them to work 18 hours a day, starving them to death, even cutting limbs from them to teach them a lesson, to instill fears on other slaves. But hey, they went to church. They were praying God. But that's not really where this conversation is going. So when Abraham Lincoln decided, hey, guys, this is not acceptable to treat human beings like this. Now, I must say right off the bat that Abraham Lincoln did not have slaves. His parents did not have slaves. In fact, Abraham Lincoln said that I would not be a master because I would not be a slave. So he understood that the inhuman treatment of blacks, or any individual for that matter, was unacceptable, because those who were doing it would never accept to be in that predicament. So Abraham Lincoln signed the executive order, the Emancipation Act, officially freeing the slaves. Now, you would think those churchgoers, God-loving individuals would have finally seen the light and say, oh my God, what were we doing? No. They fought with their lives to keep slavery around. Yes, whites, that's what the Civil War 1861 to 1865, that's what the Civil War was about. There were two groups of whites, those who are racist, those who discriminate, those who wanted to keep slavery around. They fought with their lives to keep slavery in the United States of America. And there were the other group of whites who were not racist, like Abraham Lincoln, who did not discriminate and who fought side by side with blacks to end slavery. That's why race relation in America is so difficult, because you cannot just meet any individual on the street, any white, and think this person is a racist. It's a complex issue. So we know there are two groups of whites in the nation: those who are racist, who side to keep slavery around, and those who fought to end slavery. Both sides lost hundreds of thousands of people just for that reason. Yes, those same God-loving, Bible-loving churchgoers wanted to keep slavery around because, hey, it's a good thing. They make us money, free money. They enriched us. And that's the way whites who are racist, whites who discriminate, that's the way that they see blacks. It's opportunity for them to get richer and richer no matter what happened to blacks. And slavery ended, for sake of conversation, we're going to say in 1865. That's when the Civil War ended. Of course, the Emancipation Act was passed 62-63, but because of the Civil War, it was still something in limbo. So we're going to say, for sake of conversation, that slavery ended in 1865. But keep in mind that even as of 1960s, the United States still had slaves. Now, it wasn't widespread as it was before the Emancipation Act or immediately after the Emancipation Act. However, just to give you a sense that even beyond the Emancipation Act, there were still slaves who did not know that they were free, and white who still keep them in that predicament. And as I mentioned, those usually, it used to be a time when it was very easy to know exactly where those who are racist, those who discriminate live. That was in the South, because the South was mostly involved in slaves trade and in making certain that those slaves worked the field day and night to enrich the whites. But today, it's impossible to say where those who are racist and those who discriminate live, because with migration all over the place, people moving from one part of the country to another, now it's very difficult, if it's not impossible, for you to meet with a white individual and say this person is racist or this person is not. Because first, we don't know where they come from, because even people who used to live in the North moved to the South. Those could have been people or ancestors or descendants of people who fought to end slavery. So there is a mixing of whites all across the nation, makes the idea of solving race relation in America even more difficult. But one thing is certain: racism, discrimination in America is not the work of a few people. This is not just a few people. This is not the white nationalists. This is not the KKK. During slavery in the 18th century, 1/3 of the population in the South were black slaves. 1/3. Huge population. And all of them, whether it's household chores or on the field, they were all, any black in the South at that time was slave. Now, you must understand that slavery started as an economic issue, a tool that was used by whites in order to become richer, in order to increase their social status, in order to acquire wealth. That's how it started. So blacks were considered merchandise that they could use to get to that point, or when it was no longer necessary for them to have, then they would sell those blacks to others. So it was a trade. Blacks were just merchandise that were being taken. Unfortunately, it wasn't just any merchandise, it was human beings that were chased, killed, captured, sold, forced to do what they didn't sign up for. And in the process, they were brutalized. And whites always want you to know that blacks are violent. The harm, the horrific harm that whites inflicted on slaves cannot be compared to anything that blacks today that are currently being labeled as violent could possibly do in this day and age. But you're going to understand why those labels, those negative label, those negative connotation on black, why they exist. They continue to exist up to today. First, they kidnap them, take them to another part of the world, to other parts of the world, sold them like merchandise, forced them to work in order to increase their wealth, their stature. And if they show any sign of fatigue, they would be beat until they bled and forced to go back after they get beat to the field to work 18 hours. And whites call blacks lazy. Up to today, this kind of stigma stay. Whites who were having fun time at home, drinking tea, making jokes, going here and there to the movies, to the theater, while blacks in the field working 18 hours a day. Whites called black slaves. And you will understand why all those negative connotations still exist today. It's not accident. We started the conversation yesterday for you to understand why this very predicament here in the United States prevent race relation issues from being resolved. There are two groups of whites in the nation. There were two groups of whites during slavery: those who wanted to keep slavery around and those who fought to end slavery. Today, the same predicament exists in America. There are two groups of whites: those who are racist and discriminate, and those who are fighting to end racism and to end discrimination in America. We are very conscious of that. We cannot put everyone in the same under the same umbrella, because we know even during slavery time, when it was the thing. There were whites who could not stomach that. There were whites who knew it was bad, it was not okay to do. There were whites who were against the idea. Ironically, those with high degree of morality, the Christian, those were the ones who promoted, who condoned, who practiced slavery. And that's why the whites who are still racist or discriminate pretend to be Christian, a cover for whites to continue to do the same evil they were doing during slavery. Now, don't get me wrong, I do understand that whites, whether it's whites and black, weren't around. Those who live today were not around during slavery. That is understood. Slavery officially ended in 1865, so there is no way that the individuals, white and black, could possibly still be around today. Their ancestors were those people. Great, 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 great grandfather was a slave owner. Became very rich, owned lands and houses, businesses. Life was good. Send kids to best school, get a great education, either take over the business or go and get a great job, a government job, any job, but he has the education. In the meantime, recall, blacks were in the field working 18 hours a day. Now, why in the world, beyond slavery, we still have that problem? Now, there are many factors involved. Many, many, many factors. Now, I need to connect with for you the time of slavery with today. We're going to call the ancestor for a white individual living today, we're going to call the ancestor Joe. And we're going to call the white individual who is descendant of that slave owner, who is the ancestor, we're going to call him Smith. So Smith is the young man. He could be married, have kids of his own. Smith came from a lineage of someone who was a slave owner. Joe. We say Joe, great, 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 great grandfather was a slave owner. Joe made a lot of money, bought a lot of land. He had a lot of slaves, which he traded back and forth to make some more money. So when Joe was living this life, he passed all his wealth to the next generation. And the next generation. And the next generation. And the next generation until it gets to Smith. Smith today is doing quite well. He has wealth that was passed down to him by his ancestors, who was slave owners. So when you see Smith looking at now, if you take, which we will show you, if you take the counterpart, the black counterpart to Smith, you have a very different picture. Because the counterpart to Smith was a slave. He didn't know how to read. All his strength was taken away from him. He didn't know how to read. Even if he was lucky and become one of the free slaves, there is not much that that particular individual would become in life in comparison to Smith. Smith started very well. House, business, car, good education. Smith doesn't have to struggle. But this is the conversation we're going to have when we return and to talk about the rebellion. But I want you to keep that in mind as we continue this conversation. But Smith did not just get wealth from his parent. And that's where the problem of racism and discrimination, we can go back to find that out. Because Smith got wealth transferred to him by the previous, from Joe going down all the way to Smith, but something else also was being transferred to Smith, was the stigma, the false information about blacks being transferred from one generation to the next. And that is important because it will help to explain the predicament we have today in the race relation in America. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. the past few days, we've been talking about the fact that democracy in America is in serious jeopardy. One of the most important aspect of our democracy is the fact that at some point you would, as a matter of fact, it probably makes sense why individuals who are American, who have never been concerned about other countries, believe that it's impossible for our system of government to disappear, which means for us to lose our democracy. Now, one of the most important aspects that the framers of the Constitution did, which was, you would say, especially at the time that they did that, you would consider the action genius, because 2 centuries and a half ago, 250 years, it's almost as if they could see the future. But that's not really the case. The framers of the Constitution were English, people who escaped England, who escaped the idea of one individual, a king, have full power over people, because the king or the queen could do anything he or she chooses for no reason. They could get someone killed, don't have to provide any reason behind it. Lives were everyone's life was hung in the balance of how the king or the queen wake up. So when they came here, they set a structure of government which guarantees that no matter what happened, we still have a say over our own existence, over our destiny. Now, for the past 2 years, it is proven that there was some flaws in our Constitution. And those flaws cannot be ignored, because it proves that we have a weakness. There is a weakness in the Constitution which need to be addressed. Now, notwithstanding the fact that a foreign entity meddle in our internal affairs and manage to influence our election and put in the Oval Office someone that they decided they want in the Oval Office. Now, for people who support Donald Trump, I already said it and I'll say it again, their naivety, their ignorance make it impossible to rely on them to save the Republic, because it's already proven that there is nothing, no argument, no logic, no rationale that anyone can have a conversation with those individuals and explain to them that the interest of the Republic is more important than an individual. That's already established. In fact, I believe it was Lindsey Graham that, even before he became a lapdog for Donald Trump, he was the one that was making that very point. So, because of that, we found a very huge flaw, a very big weakness in our Constitution. Now, the framers of the Constitution set a government with 3 equal branches. Now, what does that mean? That means each branch of the government is equal to the other branch. So there is no, the President of the United States cannot order Congress or the Senate, cannot order the justice, the Supreme Court justice to do anything. And the reason is because they are equal in power. So that was great, the way that they were able for 250 years ago to see that it was important to set the government this way in order to prevent any one individual from becoming a dictator and do anything he wants. So that was well thought out. Until 2 years ago, we found out there was a major flaw. The fact that the legislative branch was fully controlled by one political party, which also completely relinquished its duty to the executive branch. In other words, we no longer had, for the last 2 years, 3 branches of the government. We only had 1 branch of the government. It's almost as if we had a dictatorship type of government. Now, the Supreme Court justice was more or less on the side because the Supreme Court was not in collusion or colluding with the executive branch. So we can still say that maybe we had 2 branches of the government. But the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court justice is not part of the operation of our government. In other words, it really didn't matter much that the Supreme Court still remains a separate branch of the government, because the 2 branches that operate on a regular basis, that do things that impact us on a regular basis, are the executive branch and the legislative branch. Now, because the legislative branch, now it's not just because it was completely in the hands of the Republican, because it's okay that was the case, but rather because the legislative branch completely abandoned the task for which it exists. The legislative branch is not there to serve the executive branch. That's not the purpose of the legislative branch. The very purpose of the legislative branch is to put a check on the executive branch. But as we know, Republicans who were completely in control of both the Congress and the Senate were not just, in fact, what makes it even worse is not the fact that they weren't doing anything, it's the fact that they were helping the executive branch, undermining our democracy. That's what makes the situation even worse. So there was a major flaw exposed, that when we have a legislative branch which is fully controlled by one political party, there is the possibility that that branch may not do the job for which it exists. The Republican taught us that lesson. So what do we do? Because there is no debate there, there is no argument there. The past 2 years prove beyond a shred of a doubt that it just doesn't work. If the executive branch is Republican and the legislative branch is controlled fully by Republican, the Constitution doesn't work too well, because the Republicans just proved that they were willing to go along and undermine our government, undermine the system of government, undermine our democracy, just to go along with the executive branch. So we do have a problem in the nation. We have a serious problem. Our democracy is in serious jeopardy. The past 2 years prove that. Now, the question that I have, which seems to make logical sense, is why would hundreds of members of Congress and 50 plus members of the Senate, Republican that is, would go along, would abandon the job for which they were elected, would fully support an executive branch that was obviously, blatantly, openly involved in undermining our democracy? Why would that happen? The answer is obviously very simple. Members in the Republican members in the legislative branch are compromised. So it's not just Donald Trump that was in collusion, in collaboration with the Russians. That's my conclusion. It was not just Donald Trump. In fact, I would say it's because Donald Trump is also capable of outing other Republicans who were also compromised by Russia. I am fairly confident that's what this problem is about. That other Republican leaders were also compromised by Russia, and protecting Donald Trump is not so much to protect Donald Trump, but to protect their own behind. I am fairly confident that when Mueller issues his report, I would not at all be shocked that many Republican leaders, both current and former, were also compromised in the whole Russia scandal. And that's the reason they spend so much time defending, shielding, collaborating with Donald Trump, because it just doesn't make any logical sense that you would have hundreds, over 200 congressmen and more than 50 senators, all of them rallying, relinquishing their duty to protect the nation, and instead shielding Donald Trump. It makes no logical sense. So it is my conclusion that they too are compromised. The whole GOP, the whole Republican Party, at the very least, leaders of the Republican Party are also compromised in the whole Russia scandal. Tomorrow, we will give you a few examples that seems to provide that kind of conclusion more strength. Because anyone in his or her right mind would tell you there is no way in the world that a president who is so incompetent would get so much support from seasoned politicians in Washington, unless there is something else to that picture. And it is my conclusion that there is something else.
In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy. Constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news, Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. I do thank you for spending the time with me. You have become part of the solution. I hope you enjoy this program. If you have questions, criticism, suggestion, please do contact us. We'd like to hear from you. And if you have a topic which you might have any interest in and you would like us to research the topic, do not hesitate to send us that request and we will research it and debate it here. Our goal, our objective is to remove the biggest obstacle which prevent us from moving forward, from making progress, from having a more perfect union. I hope you did enjoy this program, and I hope to see you again next time. Have a good afternoon. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. The Fourth Branch Podcast
is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.